women feel like we're supposed to naturally know how to be caregivers. We're taught that this is like a innate bond, right? That you're supposed to just like have right away and you're supposed to know what to do. And I think that's part of the like feeling of failure you're talking about is like when that doesn't match, because these are actually skills. Parenting or caregiving are like really important skills that take practice, they take experience, they take creativity, they take problem solving. But we say that they're just natural as a way to not compensate or really value the work.
Ever feel like you suck at this job? Motherhood, I mean. Have too much anxiety and not enough patience? Too much yelling, not enough play? There's no manual, no village, no guarantees. The stakes are high. We want so badly to get it right. But this is survival mode. We're just trying to make it to bedtime. So if you're full of mom guilt, your temper scares you, you feel like you're screwing everything up, and you're afraid to admit any of those things out loud, this podcast is for you. This is Failing Motherhood. I'm Danielle Bettman, and each week we'll chat with a mom ready to be real, sharing her insecurities, her fears, her failures, and her wins. We do not have it all figured out. That's not the goal. The goal is to remind you, you are the mom your kids need. They need what you have, you are good enough, and you're not alone. I hope you pop in earbuds, somehow sneak away, and get ready to hear some hope from the trenches. You belong here, friend. We're so glad you're here. Hey, it's Danielle. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to introduce you to my guest today. Feminism gets a bad rap, but Erin Spahr is here to help you embrace it. She is a licensed therapist, mom, feminist, podcast host, and maternal mental health advocate. She uses the feminist lens in her work with moms and strives to help them free themselves from oppressive societal expectations to find more self-confidence and self-compassion. She hosts the Feminist Mom podcast, where she discusses the intersection of feminism and motherhood with a lot of inspiring guests. So go check that out. And she recently launched the Inclusive Provider Directory, a directory that serves as a vital link for connecting moms, birthing individuals, and families in the United States and Canada with perinatal providers, prioritize inclusivity and identity-affirming care. She also sees clients in her private practice in North Carolina and Maryland, and lives in North Carolina with her husband and 2 kids. Our conversation today touches on the society's expectations for everyone. It talks about feminism, matriscentric feminism, internalized patriarchy, and feminine rage. We cover what feminism is not, how the patriarchy shows up in our daily lives and affects men as well, and tangible next steps on how to reset and forge ahead in trying to raise kind and accepting kids in a world seemingly without empathy. This conversation truly felt like much needed therapy. So let's dive in. Welcome to Failing Motherhood. My name is Danielle Bettman, and on today's episode, I'm joined by Erin Spahr, the feminist mom therapist. Thank you, Erin, for joining us today.
Thank you, Danielle. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm so glad. Okay, so real quick, who are you? Who's in your family?
Yeah, who am I?
It's a big one.
So I guess we'll start with motherhood. I'm a mom of 2 boys. I have a 12-year-old son and a 6-year-old son. I needed a nice long break in between kids because it was such an adjustment, but I love the spacing between them.
We had opposite approaches. Mine are 15 months apart.
Oh my goodness. We should talk about that because I don't even know how you do that, really. It's like 2 babies. So hard. So yeah, and I'm married to my husband and we have a dog and a cat. So it's a full house over here. And the work I do is, primarily my day job is as a therapist. I work mostly with mothers. So I've been kind of trying to expand a little bit more to fathers who want to be kind of more progressive, like partners and are trying to figure out how to do that. I also work with therapists and healers because there's a lot of parallels with the work that mothers are doing. There's a lot of, caregiving burnout and things that are really overlapping. So that's the work I do. And then I have a podcast as well called the Feminist Mom Podcast, where I talk about my passion, which is the intersection of feminism and motherhood. And I have lots of guests on, and we talk about all kinds of things related to like the society that we're living in, mothering in. And that feels as relevant as ever, continues to be super relevant. On Instagram, I talk also a lot about these topics, as well as like a lot of like political sort of commentary. And I'm sure we'll get into some of that today.
Yes. Very relevant, but one thing at a time. So we'll start at the top. So I like to humanize all of the guests that come onto my podcast because you are experts in your field and yet so relatable. So have you ever felt like you were failing motherhood or known a mom who has?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think every mother, I would assume, will feel that at some point. And I guess I at this point, I've developed a lot of self-compassion. So I don't really think of it as like failing anymore, but
Good. Yeah.
I make tons of mistakes. Life is messy, and I have strengths and weaknesses. And so, yeah, I've come to a place where I really embrace that. But early on, oh my goodness, especially in the beginning, I absolutely felt like I was failing a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to say good, but I want to welcome to the club.
Thanks.
In your work with moms, when they use that word, I feel like I'm failing. What is that most often related to?
Yeah, I think often it's related to sort of not meeting all of the expectations that society has told us as moms that we need to meet. And I think that's because the expectations are too high, that really nobody can meet them unless they have like a lot of privileges, a lot of supports. And a lot of folks don't. A lot of folks who are sort of trying to measure themselves up to a really high standard, they can't meet that, and they're trying to do this on their own. Often, even their partners aren't carrying their full weight because of how we socialize men and women differently. And so there's just, this like measure, this yardstick that just feels unattainable, even when, they're working so hard, right? Like,
So
it
hard.
doesn't usually reflect like the amount of effort and care and creativity and all of that is going into parenting, unfortunately. So that's a cultural problem. That's a societal problem. That's not an individual failure.
Yes. Well said. And so important to name because when you're suffering in shame and isolation, very much feels like it's just you.
Absolutely. And usually it starts off with, why can't I feed my baby the way I feel like I'm supposed to feed my baby? Or why can't I get my baby to sleep through the night when I'm told that they're supposed to be sleeping through the night in a particular way? Like this idea that I'm supposed to have control as the parent, as a mother, and I can't control this little person, which like you can't control people. They are not robots. And that mismatch is really hard when the expectations are really not accurate to begin with, that a lot of us are sort of taught. So often in the beginning, it's really like normalizing. There's all kinds of ways to feed your baby. There's all kinds of ways to approach sleep. There's no right or wrong way. There's figuring out what's working for everyone. And that's a journey, and that's takes time and experience. And it's hard when I remember I wanted to feel like an expert from the beginning. I was like, I'm a good student. Let me research my way to feeling successful. Let me like look at everything about breastfeeding and try to, master it. Right. And it's like, you can't master all of it. And even with that, you can't like hack some of these things. A lot of it's like temperament and just differences in babies. And anyway, so yeah.
No, that's the perfect segue into all the research. So give a quick shout out to your resume. Right. So let's paint the full spectrum of, relatability and expertise. What has created the path to where you are today?
Oh my goodness. What has been the path? I mean, like there's a lot of elements. I feel like, as a mom, I was like the first one in kind of my friend group, my family to become a mom. I'm an oldest sister, an oldest daughter, have that kind of oldest daughter energy where I want to do things really well and pave the way.
Same.
right? And so like, I think back when I became a mom in 2012, the attachment parenting was like the thing that, now we have gentle parenting, conscious parenting. It was like a more intense sort of flavor, kind of like, I think developed, I guess, by Dr. Sears, or at least that's who was like talking about it at the time. And so I was really committed to being like, extended nursing mom who was like, had my baby in a sling. And I didn't co-sleep with my first baby, but I did my second. I worked. So I was trying to navigate. All moms work. I worked outside of the home. I want to say that. And so trying to navigate, like, how do I have this, like, create this bond, this attachment with my baby where I'm very responsive. I really didn't want either my kids to cry. So I had a lot of expectations of myself that were really high. And, some things felt really good to me to like kind of stick to my gut and figure out what I liked. And some things now looking back, I'm like, oh, like young parent Erin, like you could have just like eased up on yourself, So yeah, so as far as like my resume, as far as a parent, it's been a journey to like letting things go. I also kind of recently figured out that I have ADHD, which a lot of women are discovering in their 30s and 40s. And, just having this lens that I didn't have about why I was struggling when, I always knew I had some anxiety, which often women get diagnosed with anxiety much more than ADHD because it doesn't look the way it presents in little boys, right? We think of ADHD, we think about little boys who can't sit still, right? We don't think about high achieving, smart girls who internally there was a lot bouncing around, but externally I could sit in my seat. I was compliant, because of all the ways I was socialized. So it's been a journey to really think about, why motherhood particularly really like made it hard for me to use some of the coping skills that I must have been using, right? And like finding motherhood both overstimulating at times and like boring and like understimulating.
And super understimulating. Yes.
So that's been a personal journey. And then as far as like my sort of professional journey, as becoming a mom kind of early on in my career as a therapist, I was sort of realizing how challenging this thing was to do, this parenting thing, and really like wondering, like, what about folks with less resources, like both financial resources, but internal, like psychological resources, like what was going on there? It's sort of this club that you kind of join. All of a sudden you're like, wait, people have been doing this? What? Like it's this whole time, from the perspective of someone who doesn't have kids or isn't around kids, it can feel like parenting is different than it really is. So it's so intense. So I just became really passionate in trying to support moms. And over time, I've really sitting with so many mothers, I've really been able to kind of see how much of the suffering that folks are having is really connected to our society. And so, our culture is a patriarchal culture. The whole world has patriarchy is not just the US specific, but it really influences the way we treat mothers, the way we treat families, kids. And I was seeing like, when we think about postpartum depression, often we have this idea of this like very like a hormonal thing that's happening. It's sort of mysterious. There's risk factors, but like you just get it or you don't. You don't, it's like something that's very biological. And there is a biological component, there is a hormonal component, but that has been way overstated compared to all of the cultural elements that we can probably get into. And so I really developed this like feminist lens. And it's something that I can't unsee. Once you see it, it's like you look at why mothers are struggling in such a large degree. There's a reason. And so that's been something that I've been really passionate about trying to talk about and address and like see if we can move things forward.
Yeah. Yeah. And let's do just that. So start with like the most elementary vocabulary. What is feminism and what isn't it?
I'm Tori Wixel, a therapist and coach with over a decade of experience in the mental health field. In my new podcast, You're Not Crazy, I'm sharing my unfiltered thoughts about dealing with parents who have borderline and narcissistic personality disorders. We're going to chat honestly about the many complicated layers of these relationships and what you can do to protect yourself so that you can finally begin to heal. My goal is to empower you to make healthy choices for yourself by providing you with the information, encouragement, and validation you need to do so, because I promise you, you're not crazy. Tune in to You're Not Crazy with me, Tori Wixel, available now on your favorite podcast platforms.
Yeah, feminism has gotten like a lot of attention. Certainly online, there are ideas about what feminism is and how feminism has failed, and feminism is blamed for all kinds of things. But really, in its like most simplest form, it's really about equality or sometimes equity of genders, right? So equality in the fact that we all should have access to the same opportunities and freedoms regardless of gender. So it's basically like it should be fair, right? We shouldn't give advantages to certain groups over others, right? And I think most people probably agree with that, but a lot of folks have sort of the way we have sort of seen feminism like in pop culture or how it's like been talked about, it's certainly gone through different waves and there's different expressions of it. And sometimes people have heard it as women are better, or women deserve more, or women are victims, and all of this stuff that I don't really agree with. And there's also ways that like feminism has been talked about in different communities. So actually one of the sort of subsets of feminism that I really have come to use in my work is something called matriscentric feminism. So matricentric, it's a mouthful, but like meaning motherhood centered, motherhood focused. And it's this idea that like traditional feminism, when we think about previous waves, it's gone through different waves of different focuses over time, was focused more on, let's say, like helping women to be able to hold a job, get a credit card, work in places where men were typically working. And that was a really important movement to help women be able to do that. But in a lot of ways, it denied women their ability to really be mothers and like step into motherhood, because we kind of had to deny our motherhood, right? To go into a workplace that's been created by men for men. A lot of women felt like they had to be like men. And so it felt like motherhood really didn't have a place, because this is where the equity piece comes in, because we're not equal in needs, in the ways that our bodies work. Like there are differences, and it's okay to acknowledge the differences while still advocating for fairness, right? And so that matricentric feminism, which is like there are a bunch of really wonderful thought leaders on that. Like Andrea O'Reilly is the one that is sort of like known to sort of talk about matricentric feminism, and has talked about how motherhood was sort of the unfinished business of feminism. And so when you have this approach, you're not saying that mothers are better than not mothers. You're saying that we need to be really like centering caregivers, right? And really children in the way that we create and build society. And right now, a lot of the stress folks feel is because there's this like conflict between our stated values. We care about children. We care about, gosh, mothers are so revered in our society, right? Like in words, but in actions, we don't have paid parental leave on a national scale. We don't have affordable childcare in many places. The way that our workplaces are set up and schools, like you have to pick up your kid at like 2:45, but the workday doesn't end till 4 or 5. These things don't actually work for mothers. They still work for this like idea of like men going to work with somebody at home who could do all of the caretaking and the home stuff, right? So that's part of like this idea of like matriscentric feminism is like to sort of work toward a society that is better for mothers. I also want to say there's also an importance to talking about feminism from an intersectional standpoint, and matricentric feminism is part of that. Intersecting identities impact how, like, who we're advocating for in our feminist movement. So, like, you want to not only just consider gender, but we want to consider things like race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, right, in how we express our feminism. We can't just focus on the most privileged white women succeeding in like a girl boss way. There is a way to critique that idea of feminism. We want to be able to sort of look at how women in all kinds of identities experience patriarchy in addition to other forms of oppression. So I hope that was elementary enough. I'm not always good at like breaking things down in a super clear way.
It's a lot of big words, but that's okay. We can handle it. Yeah.
Okay.
And for moms that are multitasking, they'll just have to come back, take it off 2 times speed, and re-listen.
Okay. Yeah. I'm working on that.
Yeah, no, it's great. And I want to just reiterate a point you made kind of towards the beginning, defining that like equal does not always mean same, like same playing field, same needs, same on paper, being able to compete at the same game. Because I often tell my kids that fair does not mean same. It means that both persons' needs are met. And those are different needs. You are different people. You're different ages. You have different interests. So it's not always going to look fair on paper as in same. So bringing that lens to feminism, I think, is a really important thing to differentiate, because so often without those definitions, we can just quickly make a lot of assumptions that aren't fair or appropriate. So I totally agree that it feels like the standards right now are that you have to, like the meme goes around a lot, we have to work like we don't have kids and then be a mom like we don't have a job.
Mm-hmm.
And it's impossible.
Right. Or you're a stay-at-home mom, but you don't feel respected. You don't have as much power in the relationship, right? There's a lot that you're losing often in order to have that life. So it feels like there's like
there's no winning.
Like, no winning. There's no way that feels good.
No.
Achievable.
It's such an unpaid labor job, and you have to make huge sacrifices in your career if you ever want to return to it. It's looked down upon. That's no resume that appropriately represents your skill set. And I do think, every year on Mother's Day, it's like a big, we owe everything to our moms. And then the rest of the year, we're just like catered to the side again, because there's no actual actions and resources that, especially in our country, pragmatically and practically and sustainably support moms and families. I 100% agree. So you talked about patriarchy, and a lot of your work through therapy is deconstructing internalized patriarchy. So we talked about a lot of the ways that shows up already, but what are some more examples of just like patriarchy on a daily basis?
Yeah. So I feel like practical ways that I see this like showing up for a lot of women is like, for example, feeling like they must do a lot of the caregiving and the housework because they've internalized this idea that it's a woman's like job. It's a reflection of your identity, right? So even if, let's say, you try to have more equal partnership, your mother-in-law comes in your home and things aren't put away, or, the kids are like not wearing, nice clothes or whatever it is, like a lot of times it's the women who feel most judged for it because we feel like we're responsible. So it's really easy for then like women to get really perfectionistic, to feel in control. And then often we're kind of painted as like nagging, controlling, like our standards are too high, right? And then I think a lot of men in relationships with women have seen those things modeled, like the high-strung mother who's like, you can't meet her standards. And then a lot of men have been sort of socialized to take a back seat around like parenting, caregiving, look to her as the only one who really knows, like who holds the mental load, who knows what you need. And so then like, I think a lot of women have a really hard time, even if they start to see that, to like let go of that because it's so threatening to our identity. So that's like one way it can show up like in relationships. I think also like this sort of idea, like there's all these different motherhood myths that, women feel like we're supposed to naturally know how to be caregivers. We're taught that this is like a innate bond, right? That you're supposed to just like have right away and you're supposed to know what to do. And I think that's part of the like feeling of failure you're talking about is like when that doesn't match, because these are actually skills like parenting or caregiving are like really important skills that take practice, they take experience, they take creativity, they take problem solving. But we say that they're just natural as a way to not compensate or really value the work, right? And so I think a lot of women have bought into that and maybe don't even realize it, that like, I just am supposed to do this. I'm supposed to suffer. We've attached suffering to motherhood. And so like we can talk a little about ways to counteract that, but it's like a radical act. And I think of this when I'm sitting down and I'm resting in front of my kids, when they ask for something and I don't immediately hop to it and like jump to their, what can I get you? Or when I like let my husband sort of like respond and just sit back and like not like fulfill the needs, like those are radical things because they go against the sort of cultural ideas of what mothers do, which is to serve others, to not have needs, to be endlessly patient and loving. And that's not a life I want to live.
Yeah. Yeah. And so much of that is illuminating and kind of an awakening because it is just the status quo. It's what we've been immersed in from day one of our own childhoods. It takes a lot to zoom out with a different lens and start to question things. And I love the way that you said, like, we don't say that these are skill sets and we say that they're natural as a way to not value that contribution and what it really takes and means to society. And I would equate that to my work as a parenting coach. I mean, 99% of my clients are afraid to let anyone else know that they are going and investing in parenting coaching because there's somehow a stigma that this is an innate skill that you should already know how to do. And if you are struggling, that's embarrassing. That's on you. Like, don't let anyone know that. And that's incredibly damaging to not only that parent's mental health and like their own well-being and identity and all of the other things, but it truly devalues the work of parenting. To just assume that we should all just, it's so natural, we should all just know what we're doing and that it means that little. Like, that's crazy.
And it's natural to women. So if it's natural to women, then men can't really get it. They can't really understand it. That's not respectful to men. Like, men are really capable. And we actually do have research that shows like the bond and stuff that you create with your kid and your attunement, like all of that is really related to how much like contact you have and with sort of being a caregiver. So the more experience you have as a caregiver, the better you are at it. And, thinking about like previous, like in history, how families worked, families were in communities. It wasn't just this nuclear family setup that we have now where, we're all kind of figuring it out on our own. Like, it might have been more natural to when you were sort of seeing families around you, you were helping out with your cousins and aunts and uncles and parents. Like, a lot of us are very split off. And so many of us never been around children or babies. I wasn't really, like, I didn't have like lots of babies around, so it feels like it is a new skill that many of us have to like seek out because we're not really around it.
Yeah. I mean, in the same way as like cooking and domestic work of cleaning and things like that, it's just not passed down in the same type of ways. And I mean, I felt like a failure just as a wife. of not knowing, how are you supposed to deep clean this? What am I supposed to be doing every month? Like, it's all just like a language you're supposed to be taught, like subconsciously. I don't even know. It's absolutely unrealistic.
But socialization makes it so that you feel responsible for that. And so you're likely to kind of go and do the research to sort of think, okay, I think I'm supposed to deep clean. How do I do that? I feel like that starts so early. I mean, thinking about when folks find out they're pregnant and they get a registry together, and they, often it's women who have internalized that, like, I'm supposed to create some kind of registry. I'm supposed to gather stuff and research the heck out of it and talk to other women and find out what it is and go online. And so, like, even we don't have these answers, but we have learned that it's our responsibility to go find the answers. And that creates, I think, a lot of imbalance for folks from very early on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I talk with my clients about, sometimes I call it like a algorithm exposure, just how different that what you see and read on a daily basis can be compared to your child's other parent. That added up over years and years and years creates a huge divide in the number of reps and the strength of that muscle and the skill set that you come to each of these moments with. So of course, it's going to feel really uncomfortable or one-sided when you're parenting, because even just that alone contributes a lot to how you show up.
Yeah. Yeah. So a lot of women that are experiencing a lot of like a lack of equality or equity in the home, they're also feeling it maybe in the workplace. We know that when men become fathers, they get what's called like the fatherhood, like the dad boost, right? It actually helps them seem like better candidates. They're seen as more dedicated, because they're family men. We have this idea. While women, when we become mothers, we're seen as less committed, as more
a liability. Yeah.
Yeah, we're more torn between home and work. And so even though we know that women are even more so qualified, as a mom, you gain all these skills. As a parent, you gain skills that are transferable and all of that. But so we're experiencing it in all these different ways, like, in the public sphere, but also in our homes. And a lot of women are burnt out and feeling resentful. And this is all part of this is from the patriarchy. This is like from a society that quietly, in some ways, subtly in certain ways, where sometimes it's invisible, which also makes it hard to name. It's like I often see in like the comments online from folks in feminist content. Usually they're people who are not feminists, and usually they're men, and they're and they'll say like, what's one right that women don't have that men have, in almost like it exists in a very tangible way that you can like see. And certainly we could say that about like reproductive health, bodily autonomy is something, but a lot of things that women experience are invisible, right? We talk about sexual violence and so the rates, of violence towards women by men. Like a lot of that it's not a law, it's not about rights. It's about the experience that women are feeling and the ways that we feel like we need to communicate and protect ourselves. Like these are all things we've learned from being in a culture.
Even just the pink tax of menstrual products and...
Yep, the pink tax, exactly. So it happens in all these ways that cumulatively add up to a different experience by gender.
Mm-hmm. Here's the deal. If your child is sensitive and smart, yet loses it, is clingy, or aggressive with you at home, they can go 0 to 60 over the smallest things, like when they just don't get their way, nothing changes their mind, and they can't seem to get over it, and you know what you're doing isn't working, and siblings are starting to suffer. You could go to therapy yourself and take your child to therapy and follow all the experts and ask your family and friends for advice and take a course and set up a calm down corner and read all the parenting books and still feel defeated. It's time. It's time to learn the missing pieces of invaluable insight about their temperament that unlocks compassion in you and understanding of how to work with the way they're wired. It's time to communicate in new ways, like a hostage negotiator, to get through to them and cultivate cooperation with confidence. And it's time to eliminate the behaviors that are working to gain control and attention at their root, rather than playing whack-a-mole. Calm and Confident, the masterclass is for you. There, you will master the kind and firm approach your strong-willed child needs without crushing their spirit or walking on eggshells. In this free training, I share the 4 critical kind and firm scripts that unlock cooperation in every situation, how to eliminate behaviors at their root, and the path to solidifying the open and honest relationship that you want to have with your child down the road. So go to parentingwholeheartedly.com/confident to access this exclusive on-demand training immediately. That's parentingwholeheartedly.com/confident. That link will be in the show notes. So, because this is such a nuanced conversation, I do want to be able to address that, it's not the man that you're looking at's fault, right? And as quickly as we want to jump to not all men, the patriarchy is so much bigger than that. So how does the patriarchy also do a disservice to men?
Oh my goodness. I mean, I'm actually working on a book proposal about like both how men and women can deconstruct the patriarchy, because I think that this is like something that's needed. I think we're at a place where we need this because men are, I mean, we talk about this sort of like male loneliness epidemic. Men are unhappy. Like the suicide rates for men are pretty high. A lot of men have not been socialized to be vulnerable, to be emotional. We think about, again, part of the patriarchy is we value things that we associate with men, with masculinity. And I put that in quotes because those are socially constructed, like what is masculine and what is feminine. The things that we see as feminine, right, like nurturing, weak, emotional, men have learned not to be that. They feel threatened by being associated with things that we see as feminine, right? Which says that we value masculinity over femininity, right? So if men are going through something, which they, they're human, they don't feel like they have, many men don't feel like they can really turn specifically to other men to talk about these things, sometimes even to other women. And so I think it hurts men socially. I actually think a lot of, women in a lot of ways were better, just like any marginalized group is better at creating community out of like that necessity, where I think men's loneliness and this internalization of being strong really impacts them. And I think from a parenting perspective, like, even though parenting is so hard, it's also so rewarding to have a connection with a child. And so for men to feel like to not be getting also the benefits of really being like invested in, I know some men certainly are, lots of men are, but they're still kind of behind women in this way. And I think that gives them a disservice as well. I mean, men live longer when they're married to women, and that's because we like take care of them in a lot of ways, So absolutely, I think that they're not losing anything by looking at that stuff in themselves. It can be really hard, maybe losing like a sense of their identity initially, if their identity is really built on being masculine in a very kind of like patriarchal, traditional way. That can feel like a loss, but usually I see folks like feeling so much better when they can like let go of some of that, especially alongside their partners.
Yeah. Yeah. But you need the safe container to kind of do some of that reckoning in. And usually that's going to look like either a support group, a really healthy marriage, or a therapist. And even just getting men to feel okay with being in those spaces sometimes can be really challenging. Yeah. Yeah. And that's not because they don't have good intentions. It's because of these really powerful systems that we're inside.
Yeah. And I do think that women are bearing the brunt of that, right? So by men not doing that, a lot of times that means that women are
making up for it.
making up for it or feel like they need to parent their partners. I see a lot of women who feel like not only are they parenting their kids, maybe doing their own like inner child work, like trying to heal their own stuff and trying to teach their partner kind of how to be in partnership with them, how to relate to them, how to relate to their kids. So I do think we want men to try to be uncomfortable and go toward healing some of this stuff in themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it really is not only for their own good, but like for your whole family's goals. I mean, like it lifts up everyone when you feel more supported. But yeah, the number one reason why families don't end up doing parenting work in the world that I'm in is because they can't get their partner on board.
Yeah.
Number one reason.
It's not surprising at all.
Right. Right. And my work is unique because a lot of motherhood spaces for parenting resources are maybe more single focused on just one caregiver and being able to kind of support the caregiver that is doing the mental load and the research. But I insist on working with the whole family so that everybody is hearing the same thing and the same language and the same tools at the same time. And there's still just a tremendous amount of families that aren't ready for that. And that breaks my heart every time I meet one of them because it's like, oh, you don't know how much better things would be. It's so hard.
Yes, absolutely. It is hard.
So changing lanes and talking about current events, we're chatting not too long after the US election. And many are caught, I think, in a spiral that you mentioned on a recent Instagram post of like wondering if we're being too dramatic or not dramatic enough. And then constantly kind of filtering between the two. Where are you at right now today?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, today, I think I'm like actually in a place of like going inward. Just honestly, like I was so invested in this election and leading up to it and trying to like do my part and be politically active. Certainly like I'm now just like taking a break from like being as sort of conscious, but that's like this moment. And I know myself and I'm very like social justice minded. So it definitely changes by the day.
Yeah, no, that's totally fair. So looking ahead to the next 4-ish years, what work is there to do?
There's a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work to do. I mean, what can we learn from this election? I think, again, bringing that intersectionality piece, I think a lot of folks will have different experiences or reactions to the election based on a number of identities and sort of like where they are in the country, immigration status, sexual orientation. Like there's a lot. I know Black women came out 92%, I think, of Black women voted for Kamala Harris. And I know I don't know, they're not all one feeling, but like I've heard many Black women feeling really just like kind of over it right now and just feeling like we did it. And similar to how we talk about moms, like moms have been just like holding up the economy and holding up the culture. I think Black women particularly feel that, like that they just like come out politically, like especially on the left. And it's pretty frustrating that, again, about 50% of white women voted for a man who is a misogynist, someone who has been convicted of, sexually assaulting a woman, probably multiple women, all of the values that Trump has espoused have been certainly very patriarchal, not very pro women. And it's really disappointing to sort of know that. So the work we, have to do is continue to, how do we heal that? I think that there's this like election was very complicated. And so some people say, it was the economy. And some people say, well, it was race. And some people say they didn't want to vote for a woman. Some people, there's also all of this like misinformation and propaganda and like distrust of
Media,
news and trust of politicians and trust of like the medical community, right? I know the MAHA, Make America Healthy Again movement was like a big part of this for mothers, and a distrust in kind of the current administration's approach to health. And so there's a lot. So I think in some ways, like, we're so siloed. We're so like, we're getting our news sources, like you said, algorithms, like our algorithms are different. Like what we're consuming is different. So that's a huge problem to sort of think about, like what we're actually, I think we're living in different realities in a lot of ways.
Very much. Yeah.
But I do think the fact that so many folks were able to sort of say, I'm going to choose this man who has these particular values over a pretty qualified woman, whether very qualified. If nothing else, she was qualified.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying people can't have their, opinions, but the standards that we have for her compared to him, like, don't match up. So I think we should look at that and where our internalized patriarchy, internalized racism, and white supremacy, and all of that impacts these choices. And certainly there's some of us who want to do that, and there's a real backlash a lot right now politically to sort of de-wokeify education and like a rolling back of a lot of that, because I think it's seen as threatening. So I don't know. I'm not a political commentator. I'm a therapist. I talk about feminism. This stuff's hard.
Yeah.
But certainly I think, for women to really kind of think about why so many of us felt comfortable and okay choosing a man who was so, like, it's like hard for you to like talk about him, just so awful. And like, what does that say about the men that many of us have in our lives, where we have excused bad behavior? We have sort of seen a leader as a strong man, even if he says this, awful stuff. How much of that has been normalized for us versus like, seeing a woman as like not really capable of being a serious, like, powerful leader. I think that's our internalized patriarchy. So there's a lot of pieces to this. And again, I think we have to talk about racism as well.
Yeah.
Like, it was interesting. In North Carolina, we had the governor was one of the sort of not nominees. Why am I like, it's not a work show. Candidates. Thank you.
Yeah.
Was also pretty awful. But he was a Black man and he didn't win. But I think some of the values that he had were very similar to Donald Trump. And so if he was a white man, he might have won, even though he was pretty, had some pretty serious like opinions about women and marginalized folks. So anyway, I think it's like all of this right now, we're kind of in this place where we have to kind of decide, like, are we going to go back, or are we going to, and I think many of us are not going to go back like willingly. So we're going to have to keep pushing and using our own brains and using our rage, our feminine rage, for justice, which is what I think it historically has been used for, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think we can owe a lot of thanks to feminine rage in the past for the progress that we were able to make. And it feels so incredibly disheartening to feel like we have lost progress. But like, the measure of striding ahead and feeling like when I had kids 10 years ago, the world I imagined raising them in and the values I wanted to instill in them and the conversations we were having, I didn't imagine that at this point when they're entering middle school, we would be in this huge new awakening of bullying, just normalizing bullying again. This new wave of like, I felt like the body positivity that we've worked hard on is now going back, where skinny culture is back. I feel like we have lost so much ground, and being able to be like different is good, and like express yourself and be yourself. Like, it feels like we are entering a whole new territory of like regression. And that's incredibly disheartening as a parent. And then when I went to your Instagram a couple days ago, you had posted something similar where it was posing the question, how do we nurture empathy and respect and cooperation within our home when it feels like beyond our doors that they're shouting against these very values? Have you found an answer?
I mean, the answer, I think, I just was sort of expressing like this feeling that I share. I mean, I've got two white boys who I want to be empathetic and kind and accepting and open. And I think the good news and the bad news is like, we only have so much control of like who our kids turn out to be. I think we have some, and that's the good news, is that I think that there is a lot we can do in our homes to help this next generation. And I think we are doing that. I mean, just teaching your kids how to apologize, really how to do a really good repair, especially by modeling that. Modeling repair is one of my favorite parenting things. Like teaching your kids and modeling empathy. There's a lot we can do, but it is hard and scary. And I think we should just name that, to feel like there is also these like powerful forces trying to, like sort of shift the values that we have. So it's a lot of work. And I think we have to be really intentional about the conversations we have and the people we maybe sort of have in our communities and the resources that we seek out in order to try to instill these values. I do think that parents actually do have a lot of power, though. You know, as a therapist who sits with folks who are unpacking stuff from their childhoods and their experiences with their parents, right? Like, it gets in there. Even if you don't always know how it gets in there or what gets in there, there's a lot. And also repair, again, is so helpful. So if some things got in there that you wish didn't, or mistakes you made, it's never too late to say, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry that I made that mistake. I really own that. Thank you for telling me. I always reiterate that because I just think it's so powerful, even for adults.
Yeah, never too late, no matter at what age. And so if you were in a session with a client and she's a mom of 2 daughters and she is just feeling so much loss and confusion and ultimately rage right now, how would you recommend she harness that and kind of transform that? And what does she do with that?
Yeah, so rage is so powerful. And I think that it's a very often very physical experience. And so being able to like let that feeling like move is important. So I actually see a lot of women with anxiety. And I think of a lot of times there is this like rage and this just like anger that they're holding in because they don't feel like they can express anger. It's not part of our idea of like the good mom. And if you're somebody who experiences a lot of mom rage, Minna Dubin wrote a really great book called Mom Rage, and I'd recommend it. But being able to sort of like let it out is really important, usually in a safe place. Like, I mean, therapy is great. Writing down in your journal, also expressing through arts or movement, like music, those things can all be helpful. Like, we have to kind of do something with it. But it's often like really about justice. It's usually about like, something has happened that is not right. Something's not fair. So and that I think you have to have some like, if it's on behalf of yourself or others, it's like, it comes from a place of really caring about people, caring about yourself, caring about your children. I think understand like the heart, the love that's sort of underneath that is like, this rage is like a protective force, this energy that comes from love, right? So being able to say like, I refuse to let this thing happen. So what am I going to do with that? And I think we can channel in different ways. Like I said, just the expression of it, I think you can kind of find ways to kind of move through that, but channeling it into action. And there's a number of ways to get involved, like politically. I think people are talking a lot about getting involved politically in your community right now. Things are maybe going to go more to the states, and they keep trying to say we're going to go back to the states. Well, so what's going on in your state, in your community is like really important. So channeling that energy. I also think we can burn out if we have from rage after a while. And so recognizing that part of that is like also finding time for rest or creativity or joy, right? These other things in addition to rage, because we don't want to like, we can't stay at that level. Like, it's not a great long-term sustainable way to kind of take action. It's a great way to like get started. It's a great way to sort of like
kick off things. Yeah.
Kick off things. But then over time, we don't want to just start and then like peter out. We want to be able to be sustainable. So eventually like letting that shift into something that's more like doable and balanced and
Yeah.
all of that.
I know the day after the election, I went to the gym and I put on the Paris Paloma labor
Oh my
song
gosh.
on repeat, and I ran like 4 miles.
Yes. Yes.
I'll link the song if you're not familiar.
She's like touring the US, and I was like, I need to go. It's really not convenient, but I was like, I want to go to one of her shows and just like scream that with a bunch of other women, you know?
Yes.
Like
I have been seeing those videos on TikTok.
yes.
Very cathartic. Yes. So that's one way of processing, getting it out, getting it moving. But yes, sustainably, I think community is one of the biggest action steps that I think a lot feel is not only necessary, but critical. And locally, if you are listening to this podcast at all in Nebraska, we have a big Blue Dot effort that was a huge source of outreach and things. And so we are collectively finding a Facebook group and then finding chats and connecting Blue Dot moms. And so I'll link that in the show notes as well. But I'm sure that I know for sure that those even itself are popping up across the country. But you, I'm sure, have a ton of local resources as well. So look into even, opening up that archaic Facebook app if you need to.
That's what it's still good for is these like Facebook groups. And yeah, I've joined one for North Carolina. I think it was like, I don't even know, like Democrats or blue something. And I actually met last week with someone who was like in my town. It was a big North Carolina one, but we found each other, and she's like a family law attorney who's doing this like wonderful work from like a feminist perspective, like in her work. And we had coffee, and it was like really great to just connect with people who get it. I'm not saying we can't be friends with people who don't get it, but like it's really important to have those people who you can like be ragey with.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. So that's a takeaway for listeners. Is there any other takeaway that they can do today that you would recommend?
I mean, I'm a huge fan for self-compassion. So whatever you're feeling, if you're feeling rage, if you're like, why am I not feeling rage? What's wrong with me? I'm not feeling, people experience things differently. We also all have our own like background and other things going on in our lives. Some folks may be like, I know my sister's in the thick of it with 2 little kids. She's got like a 3-year-old and an 18-month-old, no, not even 9 months. Yeah. Anyway, like little babies. And she like can't even focus on this, right? She has to kind of go inward and go to survival. And so I think wherever you are, whatever you're feeling, it usually makes sense. And so having a lot of compassion for yourself and then thinking about like those feelings are clues to what you might need. So being able to sort of see your emotions as like information that isn't right or wrong. Of course, we want to express our feelings in healthy ways, but having feelings, whatever they are just like neutral, And so that's my takeaway is like, have a lot of compassion for yourself. You're not the only one feeling this, I promise. And, use it as a way to think about like, what does this mean about what I'm needing? Do I need more support? Do I need like a break in some way? Do I need more rest? Do I need more movement? What is this information telling me?
Yeah. Yeah. Getting curious and not judgmental.
Getting curious.
Yes, absolutely. Super, super actionable. And I mean, I need to hear that just as much as everybody else. Because, one night I'll be crying on my phone, and then the next night I'll be like super despondent. And then the next night I will be like super in my own world, excited about something I have personally coming up. And so it's just going to change so much. And that doesn't mean a whole lot other than just being able to understand that about myself and have that self-awareness and being conscious about that is so important. Okay, so as we wrap up, how can listeners connect with your work even deeper?
So you can find me on Instagram at feminist.mom.therapist. You can also find my podcast wherever you get podcasts, Feminist Mom Podcast. And I see clients in North Carolina and Maryland virtually. So you can find that at erinspahrtherapy.com.
Perfect. And then I have to ask you the question I ask every guest that comes on, which is, how are you the mom your kids need?
Yeah, I think that's such a sweet, you sort of mentioned that question. And I think I am like unapologetically myself with my kids. I feel like even though like with the ADHD stuff, I'm not always like organized or great at sort of setting like rhythms and routines and structures. I noticed particularly with my oldest that they can just like come to me with the hard stuff and like the feelings. And that is something I really value. Part of how I survived was saying like, what are things I really care about? And this like nurturing like the emotional skills has been something that I've worked really hard on, and it's really important to me. So I feel like that's been good, and seeing my like boys be able to like come to me with their feelings feels really powerful, kind of with what we're talking about. So yeah, I think I feel good about that.
Yeah, as you should. As you should. They are lucky to have you. And yes, we are going to have different strengths and weaknesses or opportunities for improvement, however you want to call it. But I think just embracing your flavor of parenting and not just focusing on being so hard on yourself for the things that you are not naturally gravitating towards. ADHD has been a big theme this year on the podcast. My daughter and I both got diagnosed as well. And so I'm fully there with you on the routines and rhythms is not our thing. But also same for my clients. Like we can't seem to do family meetings. I'm like, yeah, no, you're probably not going to. So just talk on the way in the car, right? Like just embrace who you are, and your kids will be able to see then that they can do the same for themselves. And that's what we really want.
Exactly. Yes.
Love it.
Solidarity. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time and your expertise and for joining us today. It has been such a good conversation.
Thank you so much, Danielle. I really appreciate being here.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Failing Motherhood. Your kids are so lucky to have you. If you loved this episode, take a screenshot right now and share it in your Instagram stories and tag me. If you're loving the podcast, be sure that you've subscribed and leave a review so we can help more moms know that they are not alone if they feel like they're failing motherhood on a daily basis. And if you're ready to transform your relationship with your strong-willed child and invest in the support you need to make it happen, schedule your free consultation using the link in the show notes. I can't wait to meet you. Thanks for coming on this journey with me. I believe in you, and I'm cheering you on.